Hi, Emanuele. We'll just wait for like 5 more minutes if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
just want to check if everything works fine, if the microphone, if the yeah.
Yeah, okay. So just let's reconvene in 5 minutes.
I will be in the
Okay. Okay, I think we can start. I mean, we have a small audience, but hopefully more people will join on YouTube. Um, Probably because it's almost bedtime in India. No, it's not almost bedtime. It's 9:30. It's working time, right? But I think the bottom line is I'm glad we are doing something important up on this particular topic on double standards. So I'd like to introduce you to my colleague Emanuele and friend. We've been doing some research on this topic and quite invested in this idea. So I would like this conversation to be more about a discussion and just try to understand the whole idea of double standards from a public perspective, because we've obviously been digging deep into the psychological processes. But yeah, that's basically it. Emanuele, if you could just quick short introduction to yourself, that would be great.
Yes, of course. Um, thanks Inja, thanks everyone who's here and potentially online, and even if the small audience, I'm happy to engage indeed in a discussion, also to share different points of view and potentially enrich different understandings of this polysemic term, double standards. But just before to begin, as you asked me, yes, I'm Emanuele. I'm a postdoctoral researcher currently working in Belgium at the KU Leuven in the Center for Social and Cultural Psychology. Um, I've been working in the last, well, now 12 years, more or less, on topics related to migration, um, integration, and more recently, specifically on forced migrants, displaced populations, asylum seekers, and refugees, both from the perspective or the experiences, trajectories of migrants themselves, but also the public opinion and attitudes or behaviors of receiving society, maybe European societies, on this foreign and polarizing topic as migration nowadays. That's-
Um, all right, let's dive deep into this. But I think before we start with the nuances of this topic, Emanuele, can you just explain when we say double standards, selective solidarity, selective empathy, what particularly are we referring to? Are we talking about double standards in policies? Are we talking about double standards in attitudes towards refugees or behavior? Is it all of it? Can you just give a brief
Mhm.
overview of what exactly are we going to be talking about when it comes to double standards?
Sure. Um, well, concerning your question, I think it's everything at once in the sense that these different layers or levels to understand or analyze these concepts and the effects these concepts are intertwined, right? So the political or legal framework creates also the normative ground or basis for public opinion to form itself or polarize, and therefore also attitudes and behaviors are shaped by norms. So in a way that the different levels are intertwined. Of course, from an analytical point of view or for researchers that work on this topic, I think it's important to understand at what level we want to analyze this concept when it's about like understanding the impact or understanding what we are talking about. I think we can definitely refer to all these different levels at once. I don't know if it can help, but I can just share my own perspective or my own experience with this term, because double standards are not, or is not a term that is widely used in scientific research, right? We are we were socialized and used terms such as racism, discrimination. These are all terms that are very well known and with long-lasting research, which, by the way, again refers to the institutional, legal level, but also attitudes and behaviors. So we can see the similar layered structure in also terms such as racism or discrimination. But these were terms way more used in scientific research than double standards, which comes more from actually public opinion or comes more from a lay thinking or a daily use. And in my case, just share this anecdote. This term was first used by integration officers with whom I've been working the past years, and it was for the first time I really heard this term or started using this term with the integration officers that I had to deal with the incoming numbers of Ukrainians, displaced Ukrainian people that start to be supported by these integration frameworks. And all of a sudden, they had to adjust, adapt their practices. And that was in Belgium, and the Belgian government applied new rules or new regulations to welcome and integrate Ukrainians. And so the integration officers, social workers, and all the personnel, first line personnel I work with, they started using this term because they felt uncomfortable in having to treat Ukrainian people in a different way than their classic or audience or the classic like beneficiaries in a way. And this discomfort was not because they thought Ukrainian didn't deserve such a treatment, but they say why all of a sudden the political representative or policymaker realized that we need such inclusive policies, whereas for years we had to fight and we had to deal in order to push them to understand how racist and discriminatory these policies were. So the first time I use this term personally was discussing with these stakeholders and collaborators from integration offices initiatives that realize in their daily work that they had to treat these people differently because of different legal framework. And that's what triggered somehow my personal interest to understand double standards from a scientific point of
When we talk about double standards, I mean, I would like to frame it in the context of discomfort. I don't know if you've ever considered that, you know. Sometimes we just say, oh, I am just more comfortable in this situation versus the other situation. I'm just more comfortable helping group A versus group B. And you see that in a racism perspective, in homophobia, transphobia perspective. I am not racist, but I don't feel comfortable with a particular group. So, to what degree do you think double standards can be seen in a, is it about comfort in a moral compass, or how can you understand double standards? Is it about discomfort particularly? Is it about these latent physiological reactions? Just trying to look at it from a, you know, some
view.
unsettling perspective.
Hmm. Well, again, I think from a psychological point of view, or researcher that works in psychology or social cognition, or even or physiological reactions or neurological reaction, we could probably see some traces of double standards in how we activate or automatically activate certain mechanisms, certain reaction, cognitive, emotional, physiological, on different levels that probably signal a form of discomfort or differential comfort related to certain people towards others. This, I think, it's a, if we want to dig into that, this level of analysis is a adaptive uh, response of our body to stimuli that in our environment differ, and we can see all the time, every day when we interact with one person or another person, we might feel more comfortable in certain situations, other situations. We might start sweating when we are under pressure, or start blushing when we realize that we say something silly. So in a way, our body is signaling different reaction towards the social environment in which we live, and double standards in a way they are also enacted through these physiological, emotional, or cognitive responses that differ when we interact with certain group or another group. Now, we also know from research in social identity or intergroup relation, we tend to feel more comfortable to interact with people that are more similar to us, right? That resemble like our own community, or even we are more acquaintance, or we are more used to see around us, whereas we tend to react in a more suspicious or threatening way when we have to deal with unknown stimuli or people that we are far away from what we are used, or if we want to extend it further, that comes from culture that different from our own. So there is definitely some adaptive or some psychological component here, but what I also think, that's not the whole story. It's not just about individual reactions or individual differences in reacting toward one person or another. I think when we talk about double standard, it's important to consider social, historical, and structure, the power asymmetries between groups that makes this type of reaction more systemic in a way. So systemically, we tend to react better towards one group than another because of some structural historical components that makes it more problematic in a certain extent because relates to power and indeed relates also to systematized structural racism and other factors that makes it more like structural than just purely psychological, in my view.
Um, you mentioned racism earlier. So I just for our people to understand. So I would imagine that people would interchangeably understand double standards and racism, right? So, I mean, racism is also favoring one group over the other. Do you think there's a difference in the between the selective empathy and double standards versus just plain racism, discrimination, xenophobia?
At the end of the day, it's a matter of labeling. I think what we see as racism, we can also see it from or name it or labeling as a double standard perspective. What I believe, in a way, racism, discrimination implies is the negative component. So, I mean, we are racist against one group, we discriminate against one group, and less explicitly, at least, a comparative component, in which, for instance, double standard. I just give you the example of this differential treatment of Ukrainian refugees. In this case, was not really racism or discrimination. This was the standard for years and decades in how the EU policy or the Belgian policy in that specific regard treated almost all displaced population so far. So it was not even called racism, right? It was just normal treatment, and we can argue whether this is humane or inhumane, but it was a institutionalized treatment. And the arrival of this new group that was treated better than the other raised this accusation of double standard. So in this case, it was not the negative side, but it was more kind of the positive side, treating someone good or someone well, but in a differential way to someone else. And this is kind of, or using the word double standard in my view, allows to see the double sides of the coin. And we can also talk about the cat here, as you can see, the cat's in front of me. Um, we can talk about double standards also when we realize that someone or some groups are treated better than others, which is not possible if you use like this label of racism, or is less evident in a way. I think it's
Yes.
coming back.
What is that? What is the cat's name?
It's my sister cat, so I'm not completely sure because she has like 7 cats.
Oh, wow.
Uh, Spiky, I think it's Spiky. Maybe I hear I have another one on my right side is probably gonna jump on me.
Wow, that is, I mean, you're so lucky to be
You would
selected.
love it. You would love it. I know how much you like cats, but yeah,
All
no.
right. Let's talk a little bit about the research that you have done on this topic, well, what we have done as well, right? So the research shows, I mean, our research, for instance, shows that we see some refugees or people see refugees as more deserving than the other and also more moral. We'll come to the moral aspect later. But when it comes to deservingness, can you tell me? I mean, it's straightforward. Someone is more deserving than the other, but who gets to decide who is more deserving? Who gets to make this norm of deservingness? Where does that understanding come from? Like, why would I say that some group is more deserving than the other? So, maybe you could shed some light on this general idea of deservingness.
It's are several possible way to see also deservingness, right? Um, but doing some research on how this word deservingness has appeared in relation to humanitarian inclusion, or even different policies or different criteria that are used to judge the specific case if a person is worth to be granted a form of legal status, like refugee status in a country. That's not immediately evident because, for instance, when it's about humanitarian treatment and the granting refugee status, there are clear laws that they don't include the term deservingness. I mean, you can be granted refugee status if you come from a certain country that is recognized as facing harm conflict, civil wars, or potential threat to individual liberty, freedoms, political freedoms, or even like threat to one's own life. So there's a list of countries where the international community recognize there is a violation of human rights going on, right? And then there is an individual component in which you have to be capable to personally prove that you yourself as an individual, you are under threat. And so you escaped or you flee from a country in which you are in immediate threat. That can be because of the massive bombing, or is because you are a political opponent. So all these aspects, they don't talk about deservingness. If we look from a moral or a philosophy or principles of justice, deservingness is more proving that you contributed in a way, proving that you are a valuable member that merit, if you want to use a synonymous access to individual rights. This is an individual right principle. You have to deserve because you work hard, because you show potential, because you are not considered threatening, all aspects that in reality are unrelated to Human Rights Convention, Geneva Convention of Asylum, all these documents. But nevertheless, deserving has started to be used also in the legal framework to understand the integration potential of certain people, which is considered higher than others. And even nowadays, policies in Europe, at least, this integration potential become extremely important because immediately mobilized by right-wing parties to differentiate between certain migrants or certain groups of people asking international protection that are considered better than others, regardless whether they face the same circumstances. And so, on the legal basis, they would have the same right to ask for asylum. But still, this deservingness includes a form of economic contribution. So, if you have a higher education, you are kind of deserving more because you are also able to contribute more to society than if you are illiterate, for instance, but also certain cultural proximity. And this is where the racism or structural racism comes to play, because if you are a white Christian that shares similar values than our European Christian societies, then you also deserve more support because in a way you are closer to us, so I can more easily identify with your struggle, but also because you are less threatening to our values and our principles. That's a narrative that has been widely used by the extreme right, for instance. And all these narrative and rhetorics then for sure influence or enter also in the public opinion and how people then start relating with these terms. Most of us, we are not aware about the legal framework, or we are not experts in, in law or international law. And so we start using these terms, and I would say dangerously, to judge if somebody deserve to be welcome, deserve to be included, also deserve to have access to rights. And this is where the public opinion and the and the more legal or framework or structural components might also diverge very much. In recent times, we saw how this has been happening a lot, at least in the European, but I would say also North American context in the past years.
So yeah, from what you've said, it seems like deservingness have this has this meritocratic value, right? Like you need to earn yourself a position in society. You need to. So, so what's interesting to tease apart would be you need to do something to contribute to the economy of the country, or you need to be doing something to be labeled as a good person in general.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
know our own research, we spoke about how morality and rather that refugees are perceived as immoral, which in turn could be perceived as being less deserving. So I just now wonder whether whether morality actually really has any connection to deservingness, if most of it is going to be more about the output that you can bring to one's society. So it's a very technical
Yeah.
uh, thing at all. So is it about I mean, sure, morality might play a role, but do you think there is some relationship between the two at all? Even though
Um,
statistically there is, but
yeah, yeah. Well, I think there are different components for sure, but I like to use a term that was first used or invented, let's say, by a researcher, this critical sociologist, or even a demographer from Switzerland, um, who started using the term the promising victim to frame well, refugees specifically, or people who ask international protection. So not from a psychological point of view, but more analyzing to the how social, I mean, officers start kind of treating different dossier or granting or not granting asylum. So analyzing really the procedures and how this is related to these two components, which are contradictory and extremely difficult from a psychological point of view for a person who asks asylum to possess, because you have to be at the same time a victim, or you have to also perform yourself, as a victim, and also convince yourself that you are a victim. We know that psychological this then gets interiorized and internalized. So in a way, all the legal framework is you have to show as much as possible that you are a victim, that you suffer, that you have troubles, and this gives you more easy access to rights, gives you more access to services, in particular during the legal asylum procedure. This is one of the criteria to grant asylum. If people have suffered a lot and you are truly a victim, then you get the access to such rights. So this is the moral component for me. And those refugees, bogus refugees that try to kind of mm, form this victimhood and they are not, then these are the bad people that we should get rid of. And this again is clearly the rhetoric and the narrative of the extreme right. So this is the moral component. But not only you have to be a victim, but you have to be a promising victim. It means that you also have to show potential, and I think this is more about social value than morality. So you have to show that you can contribute to society. So if, in a way, is a sort of reciprocity or exchange, if society or me as a member of society, I give you something, I give you access to certain rights and resources. Well, you have to give me something back. And this something back is judged based on your potential to contribute economically or socially, politically. Anyway, there are different ways to contribute, not just economy, but well, nowadays, liberal capitalist system judge everything based on how I can contribute to economy, or most of it, and this is the most important social value that is used to judge people contribution. And so these two components are very tricky, because imagine yourself if you are in the position of also convincing yourself that you are a victim. This is possibly related also to diagnosis of PTSD, post-PTSD syndromes. Then how can you be ready 1 second after I give you rights, then to switch completely framework and have the resources, the energy, the capacity, the skills, the space, cognitive space, or the energy to immediately jump into this economic competition, and then to prove that you deserve access to a country, to rights, and to resources. This is the contradiction that is extremely problematic from a psychological point of view for those who find themselves in this torn, like conflict between showing themselves as a victim, but also showing themselves as strong and competent and ready to contribute to society.
You
That's
know,
it
this
is.
this reminds me of this. Wasn't this in France? There was this refugee from Mali, if I'm not mistaken, who jumped. Sorry, that's my dog craving his attention from me. If you remember this refugee from, or rather, he was an asylum seeker at that time. He uh, he climbed a building to save a child from the burning room, and immediately he was known as the Superman or French
Mhm.
Superman or something. And if you remember, Macron immediately granted him citizenship. So that is the so he was portrayed as the good person. He was, and I don't know how much of that is being contributing to the economy as such, but it did contribute to the general wholesome idea of this is a good person who would sacrifice himself, has a very utilitarian understanding. So there is some moral concept to
Mhm.
deservingness as well. So that made me that's a very but very interesting way to look at how meritocracy and morality at the same time can play a huge role in the way we look at deservingness.
Yeah,
Um,
true.
you were, you were also talking about this promising victim, which made me think about generally a refugee needs to have this status of showing gratitude, um, feeling helpless, showing some kind of innocence. And then when, there is a little bit someone who's strong and agentic, immediately they're like, oh, they don't need our help. So when do we lose? So are we really helping people or are we helping these stereotypes?
Oh, well, yes. For sure, by promoting, reproducing, enacting, enforcing this type of criteria to evaluate who deserves, who doesn't, we are also reproducing stereotypes, reinforcing them. So these two things are strongly intertwined. Now, I don't mean to say that people who have suffer uh, shouldn't access and probably have a more immediate access to help and resources. There is a justice principle that is need. If people are in need, uh, people are drowning on the boats in the Mediterranean Sea. This is a moral responsibility of everyone to save them. Someone is escaping violence and conflict. We have, and I mean, all these conventions that we signed after the 45, the end of the Second World War, is because we recognize how important it is that to have these moral imperatives. So, not putting into question that this has to be the priority and has to be maintained as it is, because nowadays we are also seeing how these principles or moral imperative have been put into question in global politics everywhere. So I think we are in a stage where we have to keep and to hold steady on these principles. But on the other hand, not to be blind on how this principle, coming back to this question or the topic of today's, can be used in a differential way, or sometimes even arbitrary way to on one group and not on another group. Um, so this requires be careful and to be critical also of how this principle, in theory, they should protect humanity from suffering, but in reality, they are applied differently depending on other factors, being the factor moral, being the factor instrumental, but that then creates this paradox of judging a certain person based on one criterion and judging another person who faces the same situation on another criterion, and therefore treating them differently, which is what is happening in the case of humanitarian assistance on many forced migrants or people on the move. But we haven't talked about it, but I would like to also mention it's currently happening on the way the Palestinian genocide has been framed and treated in media, in particular Western media, with complete lack of respect of international law and showing strong hypocrisy in how we apply certain standards and principles only when it's convenient to our own interests.
It's very interesting because not interesting, but my next line of questioning was about accountability and action, and to what degree media, policy, or even academia, how much are we complicit in sustaining these double standards?
Yeah, well, recently we released a special issue about double standards, and while we were writing the introduction, I thought it was interesting to see the use of this term in the web, on internet. Specifically, I use like Google search and how much these keywords was used in recent times, and we can definitely see two big like peak in the use of this term. Again, not from a scientific point of view, not from the perspective of the scientific community that we know takes years before we are able to analyze issues that happen today. Will probably in 10 years that will have realized what happened. We are very slow in university. But in the lay terms, and indeed the two big moments where this term were used was clearly the Ukrainian humanitarian crisis to begin with, and the second was the after the 7th of October and the invasion of Gaza by the Israeli army. So this this term has been definitely used to at least to phrase or to try to make sense of what was happening in the uh, international reaction um, towards the invasion of Gaza, Israel, and the accountability of certain violent actions by the Israeli army as compared to Hamas. And this also triggered the use of double standards, which then has also extended to other problems in the way Western politics and media has framed the Gaza genocide sometimes. But we can talk more about it. But it's a very complex issue, and it's
Yeah,
definitely about double standards.
absolutely. I mean, we can definitely talk about it. I mean, we shouldn't be ignoring it. So we always see that Israel is seen as a Western ally, and but does that mean they don't have any kind of moral scrutiny when you're comparing them to Iran, for example? You have been to Iran, so whatever is happening must be quite close to you. So I'm just one. So again, this is a double standard that we're seeing, right? So, so from, let's say, I won't necessarily compare Iran and Palestine together, obviously, because both Iran and Israel hold some amount of power. So even within powerful nations, people are more readily condemning or talking about how Israel has a right to defend themselves from Iran, and that Iran should not escalate the situation. So why do you think that is happening amongst two potentially powerful nations?
Well, here I would differentiate different levels or different actors. Say, first, I can only talk from a European center point of view because this is also very grounded in specific geographical, geopolitical, cultural context. So I'm not even sure how this would, for instance, apply to India or other contexts, because I'm not sure. And actually, we run a study together, and very soon we will do it. And I'm curious to see how public opinion, so people like, well, me, you, or maybe not me or you, but someone who's not working on this topic. But I'm not sure that at this level there is higher support for what Israel is doing than, for instance, higher support to the reaction of Iran or the higher support to the existence of the Palestinian population. I'm not sure the problem here, the main problem here is at the level of public opinion. I just don't know, but we will see if there we see a differential mm, treatment and double standards in public opinion about these topics, because there is quite some awareness now, and also rising movements, boycott or protests, because I think a lot of people, or at least progressive left or center left, or even like mildly centered people, I think there is quite some awareness that what's happening is horrifying, and what Israel is doing is horrifying. Here, I think it's a matter of geopolitics and alliances, and I think it's just clear how US, European countries, or the NATO alliance is positioning in a geopolitical conflict in the Middle East, supporting an ally, as you just say, Israel, which is entitled or less accountable for historical reasons, but this is more the excuse, I would say, but also for like geopolitical reasons, because it's a stronghold in the Middle East, and in a way it represents the interest and the power of the West, and dividing uh, Middle East and Arab countries in a power struggle. So I would say that here is really, we should see it from a really institutionalized point of view. Then, of course, this transforms in public opinion because, well, propaganda, because the way media are framing this issue or reporting this issue. But yeah, first and foremost, we shouldn't forget the responsibility of uh, the political representatives and institutionalized support of Israel. The fact that the countries who are supporting Israel the most are also those who are selling the weapons the most. So there are a lot of layers of complexity. That's why it's about double standard, but it's also about alliances and a shift in balance in global powers, which goes beyond my expertise to begin with, but also capacity to embrace the complexity is webinar, unfortunately.
Yeah. Also, I would like to, if there are of a few participants, if you have any questions, I think we already have one question in the chat box.
In chat, there was a question, but yeah.
We'll come to that. I have a question about the limits and boundaries of deservingness. So, what must it take for anyone to say that, all right, this group is deserving of our support, is deserving of our empathy? So, in the case of Palestinians, there's a genocide happening, and still there are huge groups of people who are denying it, they saying that they don't deserve our sympathy or empathy. So do you think there's a limit or a
I
boundary to this?
hope.
I mean, or is it just very specific to the case of Palestinians? Because I remember that, I mean, I know we're going to be running another study about Ukrainians versus Palestinians. So do you think there is something very specific about this group that we might have to reframe the way we understand deservingness?
So there are two different questions. One is are there boundaries or are there limits? I don't think there are objective or clear thresholds that we are sure that we are not gonna cross, or that people will not tolerate anymore. We already saw, like, we crossed a lot of thresholds. I think we went way beyond what just 2 years ago we thought was um, possible to accept from a basic humanistic point of view. So I think we crossed that threshold time ago, and still public opinion in many countries in the world is either showing indifference or hypocrisy or trying to justify still what's going on. So I think we haven't reached that threshold uh, yet, and this is extremely problematic because how far should we get? How badly should we completely destroy international law and basic principle of how humanity can tolerate genocide and destructions? So that's extremely problematic. On this, in a certain extent, I feel that it's more a feeling than empirical proofs that there is a shifting norm and shifting narrative. Um, the more and more people that 1 year ago, 6 months ago, were still justifying, rephrasing, or de escalating the outrage on what was going on. Now they start taking position, or at least start to realize or open somehow their eyes, some of which start also going to demonstrations. I also see it switching in the media, like institutionalized media. Uh, Here for this, I speak specifically to the Italian case because I follow the Italian media more than other media of other countries. Um, they have been constantly deny or even like switch framing in order to kind of justify what Israel has been doing, and now they are more bold in condemning. So I think we are reaching this threshold, but I don't think, or it's very hard for me to identify some criteria or boundary conditions that have been clearly like differentiating between when this behavior, like behavior, was accepted and now that start to be not accepted anymore. I think it's matter of influence. It's matter of slow processes on how minority opinions start to grow or start to becoming more influential, but we have observed this shift in threshold so that we never know when this shift might happen. And it might happen too late, as I would say now it is already for Gaza, because, okay, maybe we'll start condemning and maybe asking Israel to stop. But what remains in Gaza are just ruins and sorrow. So we are already too late. Then it takes always a lot of time for me to answer your question. But then, if it's something specific about Palestine or not, um, I've been discussing actually before this webinar to some colleagues. So we are also organizing some actions and debates during the political psychology conference in Prague about the topic of Palestine, and we have been discussing because that's something important to address. Is it just about Palestine? Um, is it, and this is also an accusation that sometimes is done to movements, pro-Palestinian movements. Well, you only care about Palestine, but what about these other? What about Congo, for instance? What's happening in Congo, and about other issues around the world? So I don't think it's about just about Palestine. Is that Palestine historically has been like the flag or the flagship of movements that fights against two more structural and deep factors that applies to several other oppressed groups around the world, which is colonialism on one hand and is the capitalist imperialism of the West on the other, which has oppressed groups all around the world, in the global south in particular. But Palestine represents somehow the fight of liberation that is not only about Palestine, but is about a lot of oppressed groups around the world. Um,
Let's, I mean, we're almost towards the end. Let's take a couple of questions. We already have a couple of questions. From Samreen, she says, wouldn't systemic structures determine the merit or deservingness? Has there been any critique of the individual rights perspective in the literature?
yeah. Yes, actually, there is a colleague of mine, the PhD in Lausanne, Switzerland, together back in 2013, 14, who is still nowadays working on these two different justice principle. On one hand, individual justice principle, and on the other hand, collective justice principle. Um, and these two justice criteria have been historically like being into a dialectic relation. If you analyze it from historical point of view, human rights declarations from already bill rights in England before, and then the American Constitution, and then the French Constitution, the Human Rights Declaration. Um, the more and more they try to integrate both perspectives. On one hand, is individual liberal perspective, so the individual freedom, the civic rights. It's now liberation from authoritarian states, but also private properties. All these have been like the stronghold of these individual rights principles. But then we can also see, and this is more like a second and third wave of rights and principle, mainly related to political rights, mainly feminist women trying to get like political rights, but also labor unions and socialist parties to give access to social rights and welfare. That there has been movement that then ask and claim for more collective rights. So not the individual as such, as a person, but the individual as a member of a social group. In this case, we're talking about women or the poor, specifically to these two movements that rise then beginning of the 20th century. And these two principles have been in the dialectic relationship, and also are also present in the way people judge certain situation. For instance, equality is the key principle for collective principle. Everyone should be treated the same. This is not about individuals. This is about collective entities, for instance. So there is a lot in the literature, but also a lot in our own way of thinking about situations that is about collective rights, it's not just about individual rights. But these two has been fighting for centuries now, so it's a long story.
Manuel, we have one more question from Veda. Do you think the West, and specifically Western media, take advantage of this competitive victimhood between different groups of refugees to justify the genocide of one over another? For example, the Palestinian genocide has been compared to the Holocaust, but there's obviously significantly less sympathy towards Palestine. I'm very proud of Veda. She was my former student and she remembers her political psychology.
Totally, yeah, that's a very good question. I can also see some terms that refer to literature in social and political psychology, such as victimhood, competitive victimhood. Um, I I think the main rhetoric device that has been used specifically to justify the genocide in Palestine, it's this dual sidism. I don't know if in English makes sense. Like to put the two groups on the same ground, and this is specifically in social psychology, is big issue that we have. Just to think that this struggle is based on same ground. So Israeli have troubles to deal with Palestinians. Palestinians have troubles to deal with Israeli. Everyone has their own like in-group bias towards the others. At the end of the day, it would be enough to put Palestinian and Israeli in the same room, try to make them discuss, to start knowing each other in a benevolent environment, of course, and then all these problems would be solved. Like if it was a matter of individual or inter-individual agreements that we should be able to promote, so that if they see that they all belong to the same humanity, then this problem will be solved. So this is the social psychological approach. It's still very dominant, unfortunately, in framing these conflicts, about intergroup conflict between two groups, without acknowledging the structural imbalance and the level of oppression that one group is facing and the other group is causing. So without actually acknowledging this more structural political responsibility, um, that is the real fuel and trigger of this intergroup conflict. So this lack of acknowledgement of the structural components, lack of acknowledgement of the asymmetry in the conflict, I think is one of the key justifying narratives that has been used. Uh, because that also, if you erase the power asymmetries, then you can say, well, Israel is just reacting to what Hamas has done, or well, Hezbollah has been threatening Israel, so Israel is just responding. But if you don't acknowledge the bigger picture and the power symmetry that exists, and this is the second component, the historical uh, component, that this is not something that happens today because there is an action reaction, but it's something that has been ongoing for 75 years. So if you erase history and the historical interpretation of the actions today, then it's easier to justify, well, of course, Hamas has attacked Israel, so Israel responds to Hamas without considering where the chain started. I mean, the 7th of October was not the beginning, it's just one component in a way longer, fortunately, way longer history of violence. So these, I think, the two components. Now, competitive victimhood. Uh, this is something that in literature has been used a lot, and it's more related to how Israeli or Jewish people around the world are framing their own suffering in the past related to the Holocaust in a competitive way, somehow in an exclusive way. Like nobody has suffered as we have suffered. And it's true that Germany, for instance, has been using this narrative a lot, but because also for historical reasons. So somehow a form of restitution because nobody has suffered as we have suffered. So in a way, this entitle us to do whatever we want. And this, for instance, contrasts with other forms of victimhood that are considered inclusive victimhood, which would be okay, a bit idealistic, perhaps utopian, perhaps, but is because you have suffered so much, you should be empathic or understand and prevent anybody else from suffering your same experience or your same struggle. So in a way, yeah, I'm very unfortunate because it's very unfortunate to see how, and it's not just about Israel, unfortunately, but the population that have suffered and that then kind of become perpetrators and become involved in atrocity towards someone else. That's a, a very disturbing phenomenon that unfortunately humanity has faced many times in the past and in the present.
I mean, I think this is a very utopian way of finishing in the sense asking, okay, what can we do to reduce the gap in double standards between two nations? Is there anything that we as researchers should be doing? We as activists should be doing? How do we communicate our research to the general public? So if you have anything to add to that, feel
From a
free.
researcher point of view or from a
Yeah,
larger
let's
perspective?
start with a researcher point of view. Uh, let's start with your primary identity, and then we move to activist.
uh, well, I don't know if this is the helping at all, but at least I think we should get rid uh, of this neutrality claim, as research should not take position, should not be one-sided,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but should be just neutral and
Mm,
observe or analyze some fundamental processes or fundamental patterns to
mm,
better understand the situation, but without intervening or without trying to transform these components with a certain ideological or idealistic goal in mind. This,
mm,
unfortunately, particular in psychology or positivistic sciences, is still extremely mainstream,
yeah,
and which makes like any tentative engagement, commitment, also public awareness campaigns or even inside academia, critical reflections impossible because then you are immediately pointed as ideological,
mm,
as biased. So
mm,
I think nowadays, even more considering how academia is under attack in many countries,
yeah,
which makes this neutrality in any case false promise. Um, Without getting rid of this neutrality, academia will be just relegated to the margins or even
yeah,
weaponized to justify
yeah.
these atrocities. So I think that's first things I would say is to realize or to kind of be conscious of the fact that neutrality is nothing than a value position or an ideology itself. I've been living in Switzerland for 6 years. That makes like neutrality one of the key pillar of identity, national identity components. So neutrality is nothing than an ideological position itself.
Mm,
And in this specific case, is one of the justifying principles that has been like kept a lot of scientific community away from positioning whatsoever on such timely issues, such the one related to Palestine. So
absolutely, that's extremely important. So even it's not just about doing research, it's about having a say, taking a position, being neutral, being passive. It's a sign of privilege, is what many people discuss, because it's if it's not happening to you, that doesn't mean you can't take a stance. So one of you met Amit before, he's there in our audience. So we are together with him and a few others, we are running another study about some Indian context. And a lot of the participants said, oh, but this is so anti Hindu focus. This is all very, very one-sided research where we're trying to understand prejudice towards religious minority in India, which are the Muslims, right? So it's not just the researchers who have this neutrality aspect. People are expecting that neutrality to come from us, from scientific community as well. Um, Anyway, I mean, I think we can speak more about this, but hopefully our paper gets published soon when we finish our research. And thank you so much, Emanuele, for your time and your perspective. I know we didn't have a large audience as I would have hoped, but the YouTube link is out there. Please feel free to share it. I think this was a very insightful discussion. Tomorrow we have another webinar with Parvana Amiri, an Afghan poet and an activist who used to live in Moria, the refugee camp, and now she is in Germany starting her studies in philosophy and political science. So she will be
Great
talking
program.
tomorrow, and day after we are going to be specifically dedicating a session for Palestine and Gaza. And we have two incredible speakers, one person who is a medical practitioner who has been working in the West Bank, and the other person is one of the activists who was on the Freedom Flotilla. So she is going to be talking about her experience, and I would like to invite everyone. I mean, of course, we'll be posting about it. So yeah, again, thank you so much, Emanuele, and we will be in touch as always for other purposes, and see you in Prague in a few weeks.
Indeed, and
All
great
right.
events. So good luck with the organization of such a wonderful initiative. Thanks a
Thanks.
lot, everyone.
Thank you. See you.
Ciao,
Bye.
ciao. Good night.
Oh, yes.